Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling a really fundamental topic, one I know is top of mind for many of you, protein.
Mhm.
We get so many questions about, what it actually does, how much you really need,
Hmm.
especially if you're hitting the gym or playing sports.
Right. And where to get it from? Does timing matter? All that stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we also want to clear up some common myths floating around. So our goal today is pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Give you a solid, easy to grasp understanding of protein essentials. Think of it as your shortcut, really.
That sounds good. Yeah, we've looked at quite a bit of material scientific reviews, expert guidelines, trying to pull together a balanced, evidence-based picture for everyone.
Perfect. Okay, let's dive right in then. At the most basic level, what exactly is protein and why is it, well, so crucial?
Okay, so protein is one of the three main macronutrients in our food, alongside carbs and fats. It's absolutely essential for life. It forms a huge part of our cells, their structure, how they work.
So it's literally the building blocks.
It is, yeah. But it's involved in almost every process inside those cells. Think DNA replication, giving muscles their structure. It's fundamental.
Okay, so definitely more than just building bigger biceps, which is what most people probably think of first.
Oh, definitely. That building and repair role, especially for muscle, is super important and well known. But protein's job goes way beyond that. It helps regulate how much we eat, our metabolism, our immune system, even how cells talk to each other.
Wow, okay. And biochemically, what's it made of?
Good question. So proteins are basically large, complex molecules, imagine them like long chains, and the links in those chains are smaller units called amino acids.
Amino acids, right?
Yeah, there are 20 common types of these amino acids. They link together in specific sequences, and that sequence dictates how the protein chain folds up into a unique 3D shape. And that determines exactly what the protein does in the body.
20 different amino acids. Sounds like a lot to keep track of. Are they all, equally important from a dietary perspective? Do we need all 20 from food?
Ah, good point. That leads us to how we classify them nutritionally. We group them into three categories: essential, non-essential, and conditionally essential.
Okay, let's break that down. Essential first.
Right. The essential amino acids, there are 9 of them, are the ones our bodies cannot make enough of on their own. Or maybe not at all. Think histidine, leucine, lysine, tryptophan. You might have heard of some of them.
Leucine, isoleucine, valine. Yeah, those are the BCAAs, right? Branched chain amino acids.
Exactly. They're part of that essential group. So because our bodies can't synthesize these 9 sufficiently, we absolutely must get them from the food we eat. They're critical for building new proteins effectively and maintaining what's called nitrogen balance.
Nitrogen balance.
Okay.
So getting these 9 essentials is key for building and repair.
Absolutely. When you're thinking about protein sources, a big part of quality, which we'll get to, is whether it provides all these essential building blocks. That's why variety often helps.
Makes sense. What about the non-essential ones then? If our bodies can make them, do we need to worry about them in our diet?
Well, non-essential just means our body can typically synthesize them using other amino acids or metabolic precursors. Examples are alanine, aspartic acid, glutamic acid. But that doesn't mean they aren't important.
Ah, okay.
They still play crucial roles beyond just being part of proteins. They're involved in things like cell signaling, gene expression, metabolism, nerve signal transmission, immune function. Really important stuff. So yes, the body makes them, but they're still vital cogs in the machine.
Okay, essential, gotta eat them. Non-essential, body usually makes them. It's still vital. Now, conditionally essential. That sounds like it depends.
You got it. It's a bit of a gray area, like you said. These are amino acids that are normally non-essential. Our body can usually make enough. But under certain conditions, the body's ability to produce them might not keep up with the demand.
Like what kind of conditions?
Think periods of really rapid growth, like in premature infants, or during recovery from significant stress, like major surgery, trauma, or certain illnesses. In those situations, an amino acid that's usually non-essential can become essential.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Arginine, cysteine, glutamine, tyrosine. These often fall into this category. For example, premature babies might not have fully developed the enzyme pathways to make enough tyrosine, so for them it becomes conditionally essential they need it from their diet or formula.
So our needs aren't fixed. They can change based on our health or life stage.
Precisely. It highlights that nutritional needs are dynamic.
Okay, that clarifies the building blocks.
Oh.
Now, the million-dollar question. How much protein do I actually need? Is there one magic number?
If only. No, unfortunately, it's not a one-size-fits-all answer. Your protein needs depend on several factors. your age, definitely your activity level, your overall health status, your goals.
So where do the general recommendations start, like the RDA?
Right, the recommended dietary allowance, or RDA. In many places, like the UK and EU, it's set around 0.75 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day for the average adult. In the US, it's slightly higher at zero point 0.8 gigacolabas. This is generally considered the minimum amount needed to prevent deficiency in most healthy people.
And this includes older adults too.
Yes, the RDA technically applies to older adults as well, but it's an interesting point because older adults often have less lean body mass. So that 0.75 or zero point 0.8 gigakilogram might actually represent a higher protein intake relative to their muscle mass, which could be important.
Why is that?
Well, there's ongoing discussion and research suggesting older adults might benefit from slightly higher intakes, maybe 1.0 to 1.2 kilograms or even more, to help preserve muscle mass and function as they age, combating sarcopenia.
Sarcopenia. That's age-related muscle loss, right?
Exactly. And many experts focusing on aging do suggest aiming a bit higher, perhaps towards the upper end of general healthy eating guidelines. Maybe getting up to 35% of daily calories from protein could be beneficial for maintaining muscle and overall health later in life.
And what about other situations, like pregnancy? Needs go up then too, I assume?
Oh, absolutely. During pregnancy, protein needs increase significantly to support the growth of the fetus, the placenta, and the mother's own tissues, like increased blood volume and uterine growth. Specific recommendations vary, but they are definitely higher than the standard RDA.
Is protein deficiency a common problem?
Globally, yes, particularly in developing countries. In places like the US or UK, most people do generally get enough protein to meet the basic RDA. However, certain groups might be at higher risk of falling short, like some older adults, as we mentioned, perhaps people on very restrictive diets, and potentially pregnant women in the later stages if they aren't consciously increasing their intake.
Okay, so that covers the general population. But I know a lot of our listeners are really active gym goers, runners, athletes. How do their needs change?
Right. This is where it gets more specific to the demands placed on the body. For active individuals and athletes, protein is crucial for muscle repair after exercise, building new muscle tissue, hypertrophy, and overall recovery. The needs are generally higher.
How much higher? Let's say for endurance athletes, first runners, cyclists.
For endurance athletes, the general recommendations typically fall in the range of 1.2 to 1.4 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day.
So quite a jump from the 0.75 or zero point 0.8 RDA.
Definitely. And for elite endurance athletes training at very high volumes and intensities, some evidence suggests they might benefit from even more, possibly up to 1.6 or even 1.8 GLTD.
Why so much for endurance? I usually associate high protein with strength training.
It's partly due to increased muscle protein breakdown during prolonged exercise, needing repair. But also, amino acids can be used as an energy source during long bouts of activity, especially if carbohydrate stores run low. So they need protein for both repair and sometimes fuel.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, what about resistance training? People lifting weights, focused on strength, power, building muscle.
For them, the protein recommendations are generally higher still. Major sports nutrition bodies like the American College of Sports Medicine, ACSM, or the International Society of Sports Nutrition, ISSN, typically recommend a range of about 1.2 up to 2.0 grams per kilogram of body weight per day.
1.2 to 2.0 kilograms. That's quite a range.
It is. The lower end, maybe 1.2 to 1.7 gigakilogram, is often cited, while ISSN suggests 1.4 to 2.0 gikilograms is optimal for most exercising individuals looking to build and maintain muscle mass. The goal is to support muscle protein synthesis, the building process exceeding muscle protein breakdown.
And is there ever a case for going even higher than 2.0 kilograms? I hear anecdotes about bodybuilders eating enormous amounts.
There are specific contexts. One is during significant calorie restriction, like when trying to lose fat while preserving muscle. In those cases, intakes like 2.3 to 3.1 GKD have been shown to be more effective at maintaining lean body mass.
So it helps protect muscle when dieting.
Exactly. And there's some emerging, though less conclusive, research suggesting that very high intakes, maybe over 3.0 GKD, might offer some body composition benefits even outside of dieting for very trained individuals. But we need more research there.
Is there a point of diminishing returns, though? Like for muscle growth, does more always equal more?
That's a key question. A major meta-analysis, a study combining results from many previous studies, suggested that for maximizing muscle gains from resistance training, when calories are sufficient, The benefits seem to plateau around 1.6 grams per kilogram per day for most people.
So going much beyond 1.6 picokilogram might not lead to significantly more muscle growth for the average person eating enough calories.
That seems to be what that analysis suggests, yes. It doesn't mean higher amounts are necessarily harmful for healthy people, as we'll discuss, but the additional muscle building benefit might level off around that 1.6 mark. So that 1.2 to 2.0 range seems like a solid target for most active folks.
That's really useful context. Okay, so we have an idea of how much protein, but what about the quality? Does it matter where the protein comes from? Is all protein created equal?
Definitely not. Protein quality is a huge factor. It basically boils down to two main things. The protein's amino acid profile specifically. Does it have enough of all those essential amino acids we talked about? And its digestibility. How well can our body actually break it down and absorb those amino acids?
Right. And how do we measure that quality? I think I've heard terms like biological value.
Yes, biological value, or BV, was one early measure. It basically looks at how much of the absorbed protein nitrogen is actually retained and used by the body. Egg protein is often the reference, with a BV around 100. Whey protein can score even higher, over 100, while beef might be around 80 and soy around 74.
Okay, higher BV means more is used by the body. What's the limitation?
Now, the main limitation is that BV only considers the protein after it's been absorbed. It doesn't account for how digestible the protein was in the first place.
So some might be poorly digested but have a high BV once absorbed.
Potentially, yes. So another measure, net protein utilization, or NPU, tried to address this. NPU looks at the proportion of the protein we actually eat that gets retained by the body, so it incorporates digestibility. Egg might have an NPU of 94, whey 92, beef 73, soy 61. It gives a slightly broader picture.
Okay, NPU includes digestibility. Then there's PDCAAS, right? That one seemed really common for a while.
Yes, PDCAAS, protein digestibility corrected amino acid score. This became the standard for food labeling and regulatory purposes for quite some time. It compares the food protein's limiting essential amino acid, the one present in the lowest amount relative to needs, to a reference pattern, and then adjusts this score based on fecal digestibility.
And the scores go up to.
They're capped at 1.00 or 100%. High-quality proteins like whey, casein, egg, milk, and soy protein isolate often score 1.00. Beef is around 0.92. Things like wheat gluten score much lower, maybe 0.25.
So PDCAAS was an improvement, but did it have limitations too?
It did. One issue is using fecal digestibility, which measures what isn't absorbed throughout the entire digestive tract. But most amino acid absorption happens earlier in the small intestine, the ileum. Also, the score being capped at 1.00 means you can't distinguish between several excellent proteins. They all just hit the ceiling. And it might not fully account for anti-nutritional factors in some plant foods that can hinder absorption.
So what's the current gold standard or the preferred method now?
The Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, now recommends a newer method called DIAS, the Digestible Indispensable Amino Acid Score.
DIAS. How is it different?
It's similar to PDCAAS in comparing amino acid profiles to requirements, but critically, it uses allele digestibility measuring absorption at the end of the small intestine for each individual essential amino acid. This is considered more physiologically relevant. Plus, DIAS scores are not capped at 1.00, so it allows for better differentiation between high-quality protein sources.
Okay, so DIAS gives a more precise picture of how much of each essential amino acid is actually absorbed where it matters most.
Exactly. Generally, animal proteins like dairy, eggs, and meat tend to score higher on DIAS due to their digestibility and complete EAA profiles. But some plant proteins, notably soy isolate and potato protein, can also achieve high scores. It gives us a better tool to compare.
Got it. So quality matters. Check the amino acid profile and digestibility. Now let's talk sources. Animal versus plant seems like the big divide. What are the pros and cons?
Okay. Animal proteins, we're talking eggs, dairy products, milk, cheese, yogurt, meat, poultry, fish are generally considered high quality because they typically contain all 9 essential amino acids in good proportions, and they're usually highly digestible.
The complete package, basically.
Pretty much. Historically, there were concerns about saturated fat and cholesterol often found alongside animal protein, but the current thinking, especially for lean sources and in the context of an overall healthy diet, is more nuanced. They contribute a lot of protein to Western diets.
Right. What about plant-based proteins, legumes, nuts, seeds, grains?
Plant proteins are fantastic sources too. Think beans, lentils, chickpeas, tofu from soy, nuts, seeds like chia and hemp, and grains like quinoa and oats. A key consideration with plant proteins is that individual sources might be lower in one or two essential amino acids.
The limiting amino acid we talked about with PDCAAS.
Exactly. For example, legumes are often lower in methionine, while grains tend to be lower in lysine. But the great thing is, you can get all the essential amino acids you need from plants by eating a variety of sources throughout the day.
The idea of protein combining, or complementary proteins.
Precisely. Eating rice and beans together, or hummus and pita bread, or peanut butter on whole wheat toast, these combinations tend to provide a more complete amino acid profile together than either food alone. Though it's now understood you don't necessarily need to combine them in the same meal, just getting variety over the course of the day is usually sufficient for most people.
That's good to know. Makes it less complicated. Are there any downsides to plant proteins?
One thing to be aware of is that some plant foods, especially raw seeds or grains, can contain anti-nutritional factors compounds that might slightly reduce protein digestibility or mineral absorption. However, traditional preparation methods like cooking, soaking, fermenting, or sprouting significantly reduce these compounds.
So preparation matters. And soy protein seems to be a standout among plants.
Yes, soy is often highlighted because it has a very well-balanced amino acid profile, quite similar to animal proteins in terms of essential amino acids, and it generally scores well on quality metrics like PDCAAS and DIAS.
Can you give some practical examples like how much protein is in some common foods?
Sure, thinking about some examples maybe from German guidelines, for instance, like a good portion of oven-baked potatoes served with quark, a type of dairy product, is a classic high-protein meal there. Or fried potatoes with eggs, quark or skyr on their own are very high. A glass of buttermilk or low-fat milk provides a decent amount. Oats with milk for breakfast, whole grain bread topped with cheese or quark, or even peanut butter or hummus. Soy yogurt is another good plant-based option. It's about combining these things.
That helps visualize it. What about newer alternative protein sources? I hear about cultured meat, insect protein.
Yeah, that's a rapidly developing area. Cultured meat, or lab-grown meat, aims to grow animal muscle tissue from cells in a lab. The potential is controlled production, maybe more sustainable, but challenges remain with cost, texture, and scaling up.
Could it be added to existing products?
Potentially, yeah, maybe blended into processed meats initially. Then there's single-cell protein produced from microorganisms like yeast, fungi, or bacteria, often grown on waste streams. It could be a very sustainable source. Edible insects are another option gaining traction. They can be quite nutritious. And things like hemp protein and even protein from duckweed, like Wolfia globosa, are being explored.
Duckweed protein. Wow. Okay, lots of options emerging. Let's shift gears slightly to satiety, that feeling of fullness. You mentioned protein helps regulate appetite. How does that work? Why is protein considered so satiating?
It really is the most satiating macronutrient, generally speaking, more so than carbohydrates or fats on a calorie-for-calorie basis. There are several proposed mechanisms.
Like what?
One major factor is hormonal regulation. Digesting protein stimulates the release of gut hormones like GLP-1, PYY, and CCK. These hormones travel to the brain and signal fullness, basically telling you to stop eating. Protein can also help suppress ghrelin, the main hormone that signals hunger.
So it ramps up the I'm full signals and turns down the I'm hungry signal.
Pretty much, yeah. Another factor is the thermic effect of food, or DIT, which we touched on. Your body actually burns more calories digesting and processing protein compared to carbs or fats. Maybe 20–30% of the protein calories consumed are used in this process versus much less for carbs and fats. This higher energy expenditure might contribute to feeling satisfied.
Interesting. Any other reasons?
Well, the increased levels of amino acids circulating in the blood after a protein-rich meal might directly signal satiety centers in the brain. And some metabolic effects, like the body potentially making glucose from amino acids, gluconeogenesis, or even producing ketones if carbs are very low, might also play a role in suppressing appetite.
Okay, so multiple factors working together to make protein filling. It's useful for weight management, I imagine.
Definitely. Higher protein diets are often found to be helpful for controlling appetite and reducing overall calorie intake, which can support weight loss or maintenance.
Right. Now, back to the athletes and active listeners. Timing. We kind of debunked the super strict anabolic window, but does timing protein around workouts offer any advantage?
It's still an area of active research and some debate. While the window for muscle protein synthesis stays open for quite a while, maybe 24 hours or more post-exercise, the question is whether consuming protein soon after exercise is more effective than waiting a few hours.
And what's the verdict?
The evidence is a bit mixed. Some studies suggest consuming protein, often with carbs, within an hour or two post-exercise might maximize the muscle protein synthesis response compared to delaying intake for, say, 3-4 hours. Others find less of a difference, especially if total daily protein intake is adequate and distributed reasonably well.
So it might offer a slight edge, but maybe not make or break for most people.
That's probably a fair summary. The overall daily protein intake and consistent resistance training are likely the most critical factors for long-term muscle growth. Consuming protein around the workout, whether shortly before, during, less common maybe for very long sessions, or after, likely helps ensure amino acids are available when the muscle is receptive to repair and growth.
So the practical advice is still probably to have some protein within a reasonable time frame after training, but don't stress if it's not immediate.
Exactly. Focus on hitting your total daily protein target, spread it out somewhat, and having a protein-containing meal or snack within a couple of hours post-workout is a good strategy, but likely not absolutely essential if your overall intake is solid. It certainly won't hurt.
And what about protein in rehab settings? You mentioned that earlier.
Yes, that's important too. Research shows that combining protein intake, even supplements like essential amino acids with light exercise during rehabilitation, say after injury or surgery like a hip or knee replacement, can significantly help reduce muscle loss and speed up strength recovery. Some studies found many patients undergoing these surgeries weren't eating enough protein for optimal recovery. EAA supplementation showed promise there.
Good to know for recovery phases. Okay, we've covered a ton. Let's tackle those myths head on now. The biggest one: high protein diets damage kidneys in healthy people. You already touched on this, but let's really bust it.
Right. This is probably the most persistent myth. It likely stems from the fact that people with existing chronic kidney disease, CKD, are often advised to limit protein intake to reduce the workload on their already compromised kidneys.
So the advice for sick kidneys got wrongly applied to healthy ones.
Precisely. The concern was that filtering the waste products of protein metabolism, like urea, puts strain on the kidneys. And yes, a high protein meal can temporarily increase the glomerular filtration rate, GFR, which is the kidney's filtering speed. But in healthy kidneys, this isn't damage. It's a normal functional adaptation called hyperfiltration.
It's just the kidneys responding efficiently to the load.
Exactly. Numerous large-scale reviews and meta-analyses looking at healthy individuals consuming higher protein diets, often in the ranges recommended for athletes, 1.4, 2.0 gkg, or even higher in short-term studies, like 2.5, 3.3 gkg, have found no evidence of adverse effects on kidney function markers like GFR, albuminuria, or blood urea nitrogen over time.
So studies tracking people long-term show no harm.
Correct. When you look at the change in kidney function from baseline, there's typically no significant difference between higher and lower protein groups in healthy people. Some recent analyses even hint that higher protein intake might be associated with a lower risk of developing CKD in the first place, although more research is needed there. The bottom line is, for people with healthy kidneys, protein intakes typically consumed for fitness or health goals are safe.
That's a really important clarification. Okay, myth number 2. High protein leaches calcium from bones, leading to osteoporosis. What's the story there?
This myth is often linked to the acid-ash hypothesis. The idea was that metabolizing protein, especially animal protein, creates acidic byproducts. To buffer this acid and keep blood pH stable, the theory went the body would have to dissolve alkaline minerals, primarily calcium, from bone, leading to calcium loss in urine and weakened bones.
Sounds plausible on the surface.
It does, but the research hasn't really borne it out. While it's true that higher protein intake can increase the amount of calcium excreted in the urine,
So there is more calcium loss.
but it also significantly increases how much calcium we absorb from our food in the intestines. The net effect on overall calcium balance, how much calcium the body actually retains, seems to be neutral or even slightly positive.
So the increased absorption cancels out or even outweighs the increased excretion.
That appears to be the case. Our bodies have very effective systems, primarily involving the kidneys and respiration, to manage blood pH. Relying on bone minerals to buffer normal dietary acid load isn't a major mechanism.
And what do studies looking directly at protein intake and bone health find?
The results are somewhat mixed, but importantly, there's a lack of strong evidence showing that higher protein intake is harmful to bone health in healthy individuals. In fact, protein is a critical structural component of bone itself. About 50% of bone volume is protein matrix. Adequate protein intake is essential for bone building and maintenance.
So low protein could actually be bad for bones.
Yes, low protein intake is actually linked to poorer bone health and increased fracture risk, especially in the elderly. Some studies even suggest that higher protein intake, particularly when combined with adequate calcium and vitamin D, might be beneficial for bone mineral density and reducing fracture risk, again, particularly in older adults. The ISSN position stand confirms that protein intakes of 1.4 2.0 gigograms are not detrimental to bone health.
Fantastic. So both the kidney myth and the bone myth seem pretty thoroughly debunked for healthy people eating within reasonable high protein ranges.
Based on the current scientific consensus, yes.
Okay, this has been incredibly informative. To wrap things up, what are the main takeaways for our listeners from this deep dive into protein?
I think the key points are protein is vital for way more than just muscle. It's involved in countless bodily functions. Your individual needs vary, especially with activity level and age, often being higher than the basic RDA for active people and potentially older adults. Protein quality matters. Look for complete amino acid profiles and good digestibility, which you can get from both animal sources and a variety of plant sources.
Right.
Protein is great for satiety, helping manage appetite. While precise nutrient timing around workouts might offer small benefits, getting enough total protein spread throughout the day is the most crucial aspect. And importantly, for healthy individuals, higher protein intakes within recommended ranges are safe for kidneys and bones.
Excellent summary. So, for most people listening, especially if you're active, focusing on getting adequate protein is likely beneficial and safe. Don't be scared off by those old myths.
Exactly. Consider your own activity, goals, and maybe even food preferences when planning your intake.
And as a final thought to leave everyone with, now that you have a better understanding of protein's roles, quality, and sources, how might you strategically adjust your own protein choices and intake to better support your unique health and fitness goals? Perhaps take a look at the DIAS scores, if you can find them, for some of your go-to protein foods.
Great suggestion. It's about making informed choices.
Thanks so much for breaking all that down for us today.
My pleasure. It was a good discussion.